Thank you. So I am going to be a bit selfish, and I am going to start by telling everyone, my line manager is looking at me going, oh no, what's she going to do? I am going to be a bit selfish and tell everyone that it is my 60th birthday today. And I am going to be going with my family to Encounter Bay this afternoon, so I'm not going to be staying with you and having lunch. I'll be leaving at lunchtime. But I just, again, I don't want to be anywhere else on my 60th birthday. I'm very happy to be here and be with these colleagues here. So thank you for the invitation. So we're going to be talking about planning and support for children and young people with a functional need. I'm going to be talking about the system supports around that. And I just wanted to remind everyone that NAIDOC Week is coming up and that the theme this week is around healing country. And don't we have a lot of healing to do? So it's looking at healing the culture, our understanding of culture, our understanding of country, and our understanding of the importance to Aboriginal people. So, as I said, I'll do an overview of system requirements and site support. Rebecca will give a primary example for Wave 2 and Alina will give a high school example. Having said it's going to be a Wave 2 work, listening to Julie's presentation, Wave 2, what does it mean and where does it fit is very much determined by your context. Because I imagine that and I mean no disrespect to anyone, but I'm just saying it as an example, Burnside Primary School to Elizabeth Vale Primary School, Wave 2 is going to look very different. So, where does it start and stop? So, thinking broadly about these levels of intervention. So, for support for children with functional needs, what drives us as an organisation? That we have a lot of external drivers for this and a lot of requirements that are outside of our department. The first is the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and particularly I'm looking at Ian May, but Statement 4 around inclusion, and I really encourage you to look at that. The next one is the Disability Discrimination Act of 1992. The next one is the Disability Standards of Education, which was first released in 2005, but has a 5-yearly review. Disability Standards for Education, so the last review is very considerate. They do it on every 5 and 0, so the last one was done last year. And I'm going to give you a bit of a statement that I really like from the review that happened last year. The next one, of course, is the Melbourne Declaration on Educational Goals for Young Australians, as we know that was the launch of the Australian curriculum. Then the Alice Springs Education Declaration of 2019, and I'm not going to attempt the Aboriginal name. So I really like this statement, and I know that Angela and I had a bit of a conversation about this, and I like to get Angela's feedback. And I talked to her about my presentation, and I am a teacher by trade, for those of you who don't know me, but I'm not up here to teach you how to suck eggs. I'm not going to talk to you about your work. I work in student support services now, so I have a very different view, a system view, but I understand how hard this work is for you. But I'm thinking that my role here is to give those of you who understand this work, I'm giving you other words that you can use for your colleagues, your staff, who don't get this. So, this statement says, educators have the responsibility to provide personalised learning that aims to fulfil the diverse capabilities of each student with the provision of adjustments. When people shared positive education experiences, they described educators who consult the student, their parents and carers meaningfully and regularly, establish and update individual learning plans, adjust curriculum and learning activities in deliberate and tailored ways to enhance student engagement and learning, proactively ask about student needs and respond willingly to concerns and feedback. When educators do these things, students describe feeling included, engaged, supported, confident, empowered, happy, relieved and seen. That for me sums up the why we do the planning. I think it's a very powerful statement, and it was part of the panel's summation in the Disability Standards Review. But I think it really articulates the why we're doing this. So as far as our system requirements and the work that's being done around this, we know that the work around the One Plan that Kerry Parker and the team in DPP are leading, there have been 24,000 One Plans completed by you. 60% of those are for priority students. Priority students are those who have a disability, are children in care, or are Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students. There were 20,000 plans recorded on the online module. 6,000 of those are for ATSE learners. 630 plans are for children in care. 40% of high school plans are in the interim template. And I'm sure you know, but I'll just refresh in your memory that the One Plan work, although it's not actually paused, we've heard your voices and we understand that it's taking a lot of work, it's under review, and that there are 3 different ways that you can do the One Plan at the moment: the One Plan module itself, an interim template, or a combination of both. 9,000 of those plans, so that's 38%, of the total number of plans are for children with a disability, which is quite interesting. So as far as the system work that we're doing, there's a lot of work being done around this Wave 2. So the One Plan, as I said, is under review. The site support for teaching students with additional needs. As you've heard this morning, there are practice guides being developed by, it's currently called DPP, soon to be Inclusive Teaching and Learning, or ITL. We also have, looking at Darren here, we have 2 educators who are coming on board to be working with Category 1 and 2 schools, looking at the use of planning interventions, and that's part of Darren's directorate. Student support services, we have a 12.5 additional FTE coming to us for a year, and they will work, they're going to be notified this week around the successful appointments, and they will be working from beginning of term 3 this year to the end of term 2 next year to help in the year 7 to high school work in supporting transitions. We're just scoping out that work at the moment, but it looks like what you'll see is it will just be business as usual for us, but it'll be business as usual just a little bit better because we'll have a bit more resourcing to support that. Just going through my notes to make sure I've said anything. So that will be special educators and behaviour coaches. It's not just special educators because obviously there are lots of vulnerable learners in there that the behaviour support coaches work with as well. Student support services business plan includes you'll be pleased to hear this, I certainly am, making reports completed after assessment more useful. So those reports that the speech pathologists and the psychologists do, I'm very aware that they're very long, and that's part of our business plan, is how we can improve that information and make it more palatable to you and how that will support your planning. Information technology improvements that are happening. In student support services yesterday, Sarah Anstey was very, very happy in letting us know that we're going to get a new data system to replace our current data system, which we will be able to put in a museum because it must have been one of the first databases ever invented. The new ICT system for capturing the planning information, replacing the existing One Plan system, reform of disability data, improving the department's management of disability data, and replacement of SSDS. In terms of other initiatives that we're working on, we're looking at how psychology is, you're provided with your psychology service in terms of we're aware that there's wait lists, especially for psychology and speech pathology. We're looking at how we can improve that. One of the ways we're looking at is outsourcing and how we do that better, and how we are a provider of choice for people who want to come in and help us with that work. As you know, we have commissioned services for speech pathology. A huge part of our speech pathology service are actually employed in sites, and that's really great work, but we have then to replace those staff in student support services, so that that can be one of those tensions for us. How do we deliver the commissioned services but still provide the business as usual service? So, and for those of you who aren't involved in commissioned services, might look like Christie's Beach High School has their own speech pathologist there that works there 3 days a week and helps with planning and programming for literacy. Very much around one speech pathologist, half time is reading and the other half is writing. For me, what I see in my role from student support services, remembering that very much in student support services, especially as the channel manager, I only really get to go to schools when things haven't gone well. So remembering that lens, because I know there's a lot of good work out there, but I'm giving you what's inside my head. Planning works well when it's viewed as cyclical. Planning also works well when sites' internal processes support the collection of data. So when I have conversations with principals and I say, how does the classroom teacher get a child referred to student support services? And if the leader can't articulate that, I know we're in trouble. The Student Support Services team meetings support collaborative conversations with student support services, so the SRT. I'm not big on acronyms, I prefer to say the whole thing, you'll notice in my presentation. Sites and service providers are clear about the volume and type of interventions in the school. So sometimes we see that there's lots and lots of interventions in schools, there's lots and lots of work being done, but sometimes we see duplication and sometimes there are gaps in that. Planning works well when the recommendations from student support services are targeted to the site and the student and are included within the plan for the student. And the last one is planning works well when everyone is working towards the same goals and have role clarity. And as I said to you in the beginning, I'm just giving you words that you can use with your teams for those who don't get this. So I've taken the words from the NCCD, that they talk about how to get best practice for planning, and I've put it into a cycle, and I have adapted it a little bit. Diane Brownlee did. So I'm just going to make sure I've got everything covered here. So in terms of assessing and identifying the functional needs of the child, every child's plan represents their own mini improvement cycle. So it's about finding what's their challenge of practice. So how do we improve things for that child? Apart from the learning data that you have, I encourage you to make use of the allied health practitioners data that you get from our team or from the NDIS practitioners. And how can we get student voice in there? And how do we get parent voice if possible? The next one is consult and collaborate to develop the plan. Who are the best people to have around the table? What is the best use of time to get the best results? And I know that particularly in a high school, it's really hard to get everyone around the table. I'm just talking best practice. How can you use student support services to help value add to your SRTs? How can they support you with your collaborative planning? How can they help you interpret and gather your data? How do we plan adjustments within that forum? And how can we help you identify groups of students for your interventions that you have on site? Planning also works best when you have able to facilitate support for tracking and monitoring. Implementing the adjustments, thinking in terms of differentiation, so as you know, around the content of the curriculum, pedagogy that delivers it, the way the assessment is used, the way the child's work is assessed or the young person's work is assessed, and the environment. How do we support the learner? Oh my God, I did take 15 minutes. And how do we have the people who need line of sight to the plan? How do we make sure that they have line of sight to that plan? Making sure that everyone is on the same page. Now, I'm sure you're really busting to hear from my colleagues who can give you real life examples of that. So I'm going to hand over now to Rebecca from Coorara.
Hi everyone, I'm Rebecca Reid, Principal of Coorara Primary School. I'm in my 9th year there, and I'd like to just start by, acknowledging all of our school staff, because it has been a journey for our school for over probably the last 7-8 years to really turn around a school culture and turn around achievement outcomes for our students. So a little bit about who we are. A lot of people don't know where we are. We're situated in Morphett Vale. It is a beautiful school physically. We have park-like environment, lots of trees and lots of natural spaces. And a few years ago, we invested about $250,000 into developing our courtyard, which you can see on the screen. And we did that very much in mind with students and their learning needs and their functional needs in mind. We, like lots of schools, sort of got on the interception bandwagon and we set up a room. And what we realised very quickly was it wasn't going to work in our context because it was very hard to resource. Expensive to resource, and we couldn't say to little Johnny in the reception class, okay, at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday morning you can have your meltdown because we've got our interception room open. It just didn't work. So when we had the opportunity to redevelop the courtyard, I was really passionate that this was going to be a space where children could break out. It could be a space that children could break out to at any point during the day and engage in a range of activities that was going to help them to self-regulate and go back to the classroom ready to learn. And we talk about the zones of regulation. So we talk about returning to the classroom in the green zone. So things like trampolines are there, and lots of children like to go and jump and jump and jump. There are places that children can climb. There are huge water pipes where children can go and hide away. There's tactile experiences. There's water. So a really beautiful space that's used throughout the day to really support students to get into that green zone. So you might, if you've got an interception room, you might want to think about some different ways of doing that. We are a Category 3 school. We're not as complex as Julie's, but we're not as affluent as, Burnside Primary. We currently have an enrolment of 236 students. We currently have 27 Aboriginal learners, and we've got 32 children that are currently receiving funding through the IESP program. And we have 5 children who are in care. We have about $600,000 of IESP funding coming into our school, which is significant. We have 3 students that have really challenging, complex needs and do have full-time teacher salaries. But yes, we've got more money. We've probably got more money in this space than we've ever had. But one thing that I've been really clear about as a leader with the staff is that money doesn't equate to better outcomes. It's what we do with the money that makes the difference. So we've really spent a lot of time as a staff looking at what's best practice, what does the research tell us about how we can best support students, with their functional needs. I've got to work this out. So as Di said, we're really concentrating on the Wave 2 level of intervention, and I'm going to give you some examples of how that looks at our site. Like Julie, I think no Wave 2 intervention works if the Wave 1 interventions in the school aren't strong and consistent across the school. So this has been an ongoing piece of work for about 7 years, really, around getting a consistent practice across our school in both the literacy, the numeracy space, but also in that social and emotional space. So we spent lots of time with teachers, building teachers' capacity around what does good practice look like, how do we design the learning to support all learners. But of course there are some students that even the very best teaching practice, because of their functional needs, they need more intensive interventions. And so what do we do at our site to do that? So we have a really strong motto at our school that we have growth for every learner. And we talk a lot about we expect a minimum of 12 months growth for 12 months of learning. And that has been quite challenging to lead because when I first got to the school, lots of staff said to me, these kids will never achieve a B, they'll never be at standard, they come from bad homes, they have disabilities, they've got learning difficulties. There was lots of, excuse making about why students weren't achieving. So we've been able to, over the years, flip that to now a staff culture where everyone is committed to ensuring that every child in our school, careless of their functional needs, makes that 12 months growth for 12 months of learning. And of course, it looks different for different kids. And I think that's important to recognise that it's not the same for every student. With this is this culture of staff being really committed to developing their own practice to improve the learning outcomes of students. And I think that has been a real key to the success at Coorara is staff's commitment to building their capacity. And I guess as a leader, we've really prioritised that with time, giving teachers the time to work together, to engage in professional learning, to work collaboratively across the school. And we've really tried to create structures within our school to harness the expertise. So we've got lots of expertise in our school, we've got good practice happening, so how can we amplify it across the school? Sorry. I think my slides are a bit different. Okay, I'll just move on. So we have very much a team approach to teaching all students in our school, and we've deliberately set up structures to support teachers in this really important work. So we reorganised our non-instruction time, so year level teams now have 150 minutes a week of co-designing time, and leaders are aligned in that space as well. So the expectation is that teachers are designing the learnings for all students. So teachers working together to problem solve, to go, okay, so how are we going to support those students that are needing that more intensive approach? We've also used our complexity funding to provide additional release time for teachers to write one plans, to work with support services. Our teachers have needed a lot of support in unpacking professional documents. So taking a psychologist report or taking a speech therapy report and going, okay, what does this actually mean for the student? What are their functional needs? And how can I implement the recommendations in the classroom? Our wellbeing leader spends a lot of time in this space as well, coaching, working alongside teachers to develop the smarter goals, to look at the different adjustments that can be done at the classroom level. We do use, a cycle, we call them mini cycles of improvement at our school. And it's a very similar cycle to the site improvement planning processes. You'll notice on our cycle that we talk about targeted teaching. We kind of have moved away from talking about differentiation to targeted teaching, and I think teachers have engaged more with that language than the differentiation. So very much big part of our school is to know our students and how they learn. So we obviously have a whole range of assessments that teachers do at that wave 1 level, but obviously if the classroom program isn't hitting the mark for those students and we move those students to a wave 2 level, we obviously need to collect further information about them. So I think, to be honest with you, in the literacy and numeracy space, we do this really, really well. One of the things that we've been, trying to get better at is what do we do around the social and emotional needs of students, and how do we unpack that to actually work out the functional needs of a child's behaviour so we can then put the interventions in place. So a couple of tools that we've been using quite successfully is the Boxall profiles, and that's something that we kind of picked up with after working with support services and through some of our students attending the learning centres. And teachers have found the Boxall profiles quite useful in identifying students' needs in that social and emotional space, and then being able to go, okay, so what are we going to do, and planning for those next steps. Our wellbeing leader has spent a fair bit of time unpacking the personal and social capabilities continuum from Coorara and getting teachers to actually identify on the continuum where students are at. And again, that's helped teachers to really identify what those next steps are. Obviously, looking at our EdSAS data for students in that wave 2, especially where the concerns are around behavioural needs, and looking for patterns in that behaviour. Is it at specific times, specific subject areas? What sorts of behaviours are children presenting with is something that we also spend time unpacking. So a lot of work's been done on upskilling, building teachers' capacity to really unpack the assessment data that they've got, looking at those professional reports to go, okay, so what? We've got this information. What's it telling us? What can we do next? So planning is something that we do. It's something that we have got a lot better at, I think, at our site. So for students at the Tier 2 level, the Wave 2 level, some of our students would have the department's 1 plan. So any student that's receiving IESP funding does have a 1 plan, or an Aboriginal learner or a student in care has a 1 plan. For some students who also are receiving Wave 2 interventions, and that might be an intervention to support their self-regulation or to support their literacy skills or their numeracy skills, some of those students, we're still using an individual learning plan for those students. We haven't transitioned all the students into the 1 plan pro forma, I guess. But I guess what we try and do, and I think this is a real challenge, is that the planning's not seen as something that we do once a year, that it's something that we do regularly. So we're really supporting teachers to move between the assess phase, the implement phase and the review phase regularly and as an ongoing process. So it's not something we just do once a year or twice a year. As I said before, we've had to do a lot of upskilling with teachers around writing smarter goals and looking at the assessment information and translating it. That's been a key piece of our work in developing with teachers. The targeted actions. So we've got some targeted actions at the Wave 2 level that are outside of the classroom, and we have many targeted actions that are in the classroom. Like Julie, we've invested heavily in the early years. I think if we can get it right in the early years, we have less problems further up the school. We have deliberately gone in the reading space. We've really worked hard at improving the reading outcomes of our students. We haven't ignored the social and emotional needs of our students, because I don't think we can. But we have made a deliberate decision to resource heavily in the early years in the reading space. And what we're noticing now further up the school is because our children can read, they actually are being a lot more successful learners. So we invest in a full-time reading intervention teacher, because my belief is if good classroom teaching isn't working for kids, why would we only put money into SSO hours? We do put money into SSO hours, and that intervention is only done in the classroom. SSOs don't take children out of the classroom to do interventions. It's only done in the classroom with the teacher. So when children leave for an intervention program, it is done by a teacher. So it's done by the reading intervention teacher. Some children do leave the classroom to engage in social programs and those wellbeing programs, but again, those programs are run by teachers and not by SSOs. So for example, one of the programs we run around the wellbeing space is Drumbeat. That is run by our music teacher. So that is something we fund out of our funding. So she works with 12 students twice a week, using a drumming program to build their resilience, build their emotional literacy, and to build their self-regulation skills. So impact is our big question. Are we having impact? And our motto is, if we're not having impact, if we haven't got data and evidence to show that we're actually making a difference with kids, then we need to pause and rethink, get the team around the child again and go, okay, so what else can we do? We don't just keep doing the same thing if it's not having any impact. Thank you.
Hi, pretty tough acts to follow. I'm Alina Page and I'm principal at Para Hills High School, and I have to say it's pretty intimidating talking to colleagues who I know are doing amazing things and lots of whom I actually know, so bear with me and be kind. I feel really privileged to be here, and one of the things that I'd like to share with you is a little bit of my context. Para Hills High School is a Category 2 Northern Suburbs school, 515 students, quite a complex and diverse student population, 72% school card. We've got an increasing number of and percentage of Aboriginal students. Our reputation is growing in the north, and we've seen significant levels of increased enrolments, thankfully. 42% of our 42% of our kids are ELD. That is also increasing. It was 20% 3 years ago. And our ICSEA is 837, so I was thinking, why am I a Cat 2 school when yours is a Cat 1? But that's okay. It's not about the numbers. It's about what we're doing. And a lot of the things that colleagues were talking about earlier really resonate and are some of the practices that my school is heading towards. I have been at the school since 2019, so I'm 2.5 years into my journey, and my work is far from complete, as our work hardly ever is. But the other contextual factor that I think you need to have about me is that I started working in South Australia about 7 years ago, having come from England, where I was the principal of a school for boys with social, emotional and behavioural difficulties, so about 110 lovely kids, aged 5 to 19, so have that at the back of your mind. And then I came here into a channel manager role, which is how I met Di and a few people around the room. And round about 16, and actually not round about, in 2016, Mark Clark, who's somewhere in the room, did quite a bit of work with me around the implementation of Nurture, which is based on the Boxall profile assessment. So she can talk to you about what impact that's had on her school, and it was really heartwarming to hear her talk about it at break time or recess. High schools, really generally, and that's been my kind of experience, are full of teachers who actually teach subjects, right? They teach subjects, not kids necessarily, and the kids move from one lesson to the other, and it's the care group teachers' responsibility to actually focus on, all of those other things that are not subjects, and also the wellbeing coordinators. And I'm really sorry if that's really small, but one of the things that I felt was missing from my school when I first arrived was that kind of connection between wellbeing and learning. And I have to confess that's something that I really struggled with when I was working in central office, the fact that there are two separate divisions and there seems to be a bit of a disconnect in the way we approach the two. So we embarked initially unofficially on a bit of a journey to know our whole child. And looking much like you did at what is actually the function of the behaviour that we're seeing. The school had significant levels of suspensions and exclusions, and it still does, albeit significantly reduced. And the level of connection between kids and school and families in school was limited, and our wellbeing survey was actually showing that at all levels. Data availability and really pinpointing why and what's actually sitting behind was one of those growth points that we really needed to have. So a lot of our interventions were driven by I think, I feel, and maybe this kid could benefit from this. So I really am very data driven, because in the UK they really hammered us with data. They give us stacks of data on our schools. So I really thought we needed to know. There are 515 kids in the school. PAT is done once a year, and that plan is done once every blue moon. And the formative information from that is really limited, right? Particularly at transition points. When kids come from primary school into high school, I get the number, but not what sits behind it. I could really talk to you about a whole bunch of programs we run at the school. There's targeted intervention for Aboriginal students, which has resulted in attendance at 93% on the days that this intervention is running. There are a lot of amazing things happening there, but I know literacy is on all of our agendas, and for the right reason. So the snapshot of practice that I'm focusing on is looking at linking the learning and the well-being of children and showing you some of the outcomes that we've achieved in the school. So one of the key tools that we introduced at Para Hills was what I call the quick and dirty of literacy assessment. And this is a snapshot of the profile that I get on every single child, and it takes 30 minutes to test the whole cohort. So in 2019, we introduced this as an assessment on transition day. It's called the New Group Reading Test. It's a GL assessment tool. It's online, and honestly, the kids sit it and you get the results straight away. So what this shows is a young girl called Destiny. The pink line is really what the age level should be for a kid, It's a standardized test, 95% reliability, so you get a full kind of range. But it also shows you the patterns of responses that Destiny has had. So, and much like PAT, it gives you information not just on a number, but it tells you which area was she actually struggling with. Is it extracting explicitly stated information and so on and so forth? The beauty of it is that I can administer it as often as I want, and there are at least 3 different tests that are adaptive, so I can measure growth at lots of different points. So based on this assessment, I have information on not just the kids' reading ages and reading ability before they start at high school, but I can really group them and analyze their performance based on the subset skill. What that's meant for us is that before the kids even make it, we can into school, we can really make decisions on who's most likely to require literacy intervention. And that's the kind of baseline assessment that we use. And once they step foot into the school, they actually have got an initial intervention package that is sitting along those 3 criteria. So if there's a huge difference between their chronological age and their reading age, they have one level of support, and I'm happy to circulate all of these. This is not the finished product. We're constantly reevaluating what we're doing. We knew that 44% of the students that arrived in our school in 2020 had literacy skills below that of an 11-year-old. In order to access high school literacy, the literacy demands of a high school curriculum, you need a reading age of at least 12. For that reason, all of those kids are now receiving some level of intervention. A very important aspect, which is much like what you were mentioning before, was that we very often place the least skilled and least trained with the most complex and the more needy kids. And much like you, I also believe that teachers are teachers for a reason, and the SSOs have got a very important role to play, but they are not teachers. So one of the things that we've been working on is actually training 8 of our staff in a literacy intervention course, which is a LETTERS course. It's endorsed and recommended by SPELD, and it actually teaches high school teachers how kids learn to read. And this is a really valuable skill because I'm an English teacher. I was never taught how to teach kids to read. I was taught how to teach them Shakespeare. So, and I think that's one of the conundrums of high schools, and there's a lot of really good work that's happening in the classroom as a result of this. We have got phonics level intervention happening in the classroom, and once the kids have arrived at school, following the screener, we actually delve deeper and work out whether it's their phonological awareness that requires a little bit of work. So we do all sorts of funky things in standardized and non-standardized assessments, like a SELF, which is assessing oral language, and we do the phonics screen because it really tells us which bits of skill the kids are struggling with, and our teachers are now skilled in providing this intervention both within and outside of the classroom. But because that doesn't really paint the full picture, and we know that there's a huge correlation and comorbidity between literacy, language and communication and behavior, and what we were seeing was high levels of behavior, dysregulated behavior, we introduced the Boxall profile, which gives you, it's again a standardized and evidence-based tool that really gives you a bit of an information on where the kid sits developmentally, and that's the developmental profile, and what their diagnostic and, or in other words, the highest probability of their main barriers to learning are. So in this example, this is Sam. Sam has got, the green is obviously where they should be for their age range, and the furthest they are from the green, the more likely that's where you need to start with the intervention. Again, it's very simple to administer. And what it does is it gives us, again, a lot of information about where the kids are at from a non-academic perspective, and allowing us to really target our goal setting and our strategies. Can I just have a show of hand if you know what this is? Have you seen a Boxall before? That's heartening, I have to say, because I can tell you 5 years ago, nobody had heard of it, which is fantastic. It correlates really well with the strengths and difficulties questionnaires. So if you're a social worker, you would have heard about that. And it really has allowed us to have a look at, okay, this child is dysregulated, their literacy skills are low, and these are the levels of skill that they need to work on. The targets for Sam work on both increasing his developmental profile, but also addressing some of those key barriers to learning. We've introduced structured planning for success sessions that every teacher is delivering, and their conversations with children are not around punitive actions, but around, okay, this has gone wrong, so embedding the restorative practices language, but also the language of learning. We recognize that learning cannot happen if the children are dysregulated and the other way around. I'm not going to say that this is an easy journey, teaching our staff how to work restoratively, because we've done that. It's been ticked. It is interesting and continues to be ongoing work, diversifying our strategies to be able to respond to whatever the developmental and diagnostic profile of the children tells us they need to work on is a challenge. And this is where our funding is actually going. One of the key outcomes we have seen, and it doesn't look that great for this year, but we're looking into why, in terms of, I'm clearly getting this wrong. I think I'm missing a slide, but never mind. That's okay. One of the key outcomes we have seen is a significant reduction in suspensions and exclusions. So in 2018, so that's my pre-assessment, my population of 500 kids ballpark had 245 suspensions and 180 exclusions, which is significant. In 2019, we had halved both. In 2020, 75 suspensions and 64 exclusions. What I'm saying is it's still high, but you can see the downward trajectory, which is what my slide was going to show you. Oh, you got it. It made it there. That's all right. Our literacy growth is actually looking promising, but we're noticing a bit of a plateau after the first 6 months of intervention. So we have got, on average, and that's just an average, our children's growth is 17 months, and that's reading age, months in 6 months of intervention, which is substantial. Out of the 44% of kids who were in the intervention groups and required literacy support last year, we have exited more than 50% from the program, which is really encouraging. They're developing age-appropriate skills. Our behavior data is showing improvement, but there are some next steps that we must absolutely take if this is going to become embedded whole school practice. This is still practice that is not yet consistent in my school, and that's my journey at the moment. And that's why I wish Marg were here talking, because she's done it. We also found out, so last year we introduced enrollment interviews, which were really, really time-consuming. It was a massive resource. But one of the key things that we found out was a whole bunch of soft data that document will actually give you. We found out that 15 out of our 67 year 8s had no mums, which may sound a little bit like, oh, whatever, but actually really significant that almost a quarter of our population and more kids than that came from single parent families. And we knew that they need that kind of mother figure. So we're working towards building up a school mum and school dad approach. We're looking at our next steps. We're absolutely keeping with the enrollment interviews. The connection that's made for our families and for our children has been significant. We also know that training our parents in our literacy intervention has been significant. We now run regular courses for parents of the kids in the intervention groups, where we send them home with packs of work and resources that are specifically designed for parents to work at home with. And what we're hoping we'll see, and I know hope is not a strategy, but what we're hoping to see is that skill being transferred to the younger kids and the siblings who are going to be coming through the school. We're reevaluating our reading intervention. We know it works really well, particularly for those kids who have got really low skills. But I think, and that's my hypothesis at the moment, that the fact that the teaching of literacy is not yet fully embedded across the school in every subject is what's holding us back. The kids don't really see the transfer of skills and approaches. we're working on setting up nurture groups for year 7 and 8. As I said, we had a significant number of our kids come from seriously traumatic backgrounds, having experienced quite a lot of ACEs in their early life. And we know that they're going to need that more intensive intervention. So if you don't know what nurture groups are, please go and see Marg, not me just yet. But they're meant to be small group interventions that aim to get kids to be developmentally closer to appropriate on a Boxall profile and experience less barriers to learning and explicitly teach those social emotional skills. As my colleague was saying before, interoception is a good disruptor. It's a good circuit breaker sometimes, but it doesn't address the underlying issue and the underlying reasons why the kids act the way they are. We're trying very hard to deeply understand and respond to what those needs are. So if you're interested in joining us on our nurture group journey, I'm very happy to share with you my training and development plan for my staff, because that's what we'll be doing in semester 2. We're getting ready for the year 7s. So thank you very much for this.
A sincere and very grateful thank you for the thinking that's gone into your presentation.